Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we will be reviewing the Barbie movie. But before we get to that, we're going to be looking at a recently released Pakistani film, Joyland. Following a long spell of unemployment, Haider lands a job at a Bollywood-style burlesque, telling his family he is a theater manager. In actuality, he's a backup dancer and becomes infatuated with a strong-willed trans woman, Biba. This film is directed by Pakistani director Saim Sadiq and was released in April of this year in the United States. So, Ariana, what were your thoughts initially of Joyland?
So at the beginning of the film, I remember that you had told me that it had been banned in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the fact that we don't really know why it's banned.
We know why.
We know why. But I think if you watch the film and you don't read the reasons, it's
the first 30 minutes you'll eventually figure
it's unfolding of it. And it's only within after 20, 30 minutes do you find out why it is banned. I thought that this is not a word I use a lot when it comes to lighting, but the lighting was delicious at times. You wanted to lick the colors. It was just it was like candy without being too oversaturated.
We'll talk about the technical stuff. I found that the cinematography and the lighting was nearly perfect.
Yes, and they experimented with things. It was sort of
not every scene looks the same.
Yes, and so I like the fact that we don't get too much of a backstory of this family, but we just understand there's the father who's the head of the family. There is the son, which is the main character, Haider, who we have to watch to notice that he's basically playing he's playing the role of a house husband.
Yeah, because
along with his sister-in-law.
I'm assuming this is a traditional Pakistani setup of a certain class where you have a patriarch who's elderly. You have all of the adult children living together with their spouses, and those children living together. Yeah. So it's a very communal. It's a house with a big courtyard, and everybody kind of has their own side of the house, and then the courtyard is where they come together for meals and special events and things like that. But yeah, it's the opening scene of the movie, I feel like, is a perfect opening scene. And it showcases the director Saim Sadiq's use of the camera, because it's Haider playing a game of kind of tag, hide and go seek with his nieces. And he puts the sheet on, and we don't see him at first. He's under the sheet.
Yes.
Which we'll talk about I think that's thematically important to what the movie is about. And so it's just this figure under a sheet who raises their arms and is kind of making ghost noises, and the little girls are running around screaming, trying to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the way it's filmed, the amount of detail. That was one thing where it's that mix of cinematography, lighting, color grading, everything. The fabric of the sheet has a texture to it. The light has a texture to it. The soundscape of the courtyard, it's all these elements, and it's so quiet, but the scene is so full.
Yes. And it feels like an atmosphere that feels very homey. So everything feels used. There's a wear and tear of the clothes that you could probably tell it's been used so many times that there's a softer element of the fabric. The house feels like it's been being lived in with, which is, I appreciate it, because I was trying to watch a film a few days ago, and it was oddly enough, it was a movie that's supposed to be set in the early 1900s. And I was really annoyed at the fact that the gatekeeper's clothes were so pristine. I could tell they were new, but a part of me is
servants' clothes should always be ratty. That's just the way it is.
And this is set in a more modern era, and still it felt like they're just going to be all right, we can't. It was probably they had a budget, so they're just all right, we're going to use what we can, ask people to bring their kind of their own clothing, or at the least the set designer and the clothing people, wardrobe, were kind of we're going to get articles of clothes that feel used, that feel like worn into, and that feel as if this is obviously a part of this culture.
When it's a film that has me very curious, because I think from an American perspective, we are, I mean, very propagandized on how we view other cultures and other countries.
Yeah.
And so if you asked me, I'd go, oh, trans people are probably like hunted and killed in Pakistan. And I'm sure life for trans people is not a dream in Pakistan. They're very much a marginalized group. But it was very interesting to see that there's like this massive theater, this erotic theater, as they call it, which by American standards is not very erotic.
Oh, no.
But that where openly trans women perform. And that's like a way for them to make money that isn't like sex work, where they're out on the streets endangering themselves.
And it's in a way, like, even though they're endangering themselves by letting themselves be known, there's also safety at being known.
Well, also that there's openly gay men, and it real like, because the theater at this erotic theater is full of men, save for a couple times we see some women there, but they're hiding their faces and trying not to be seen. So it's clearly something that men are going to. And you have to think gay men, right? Or men who are attracted to transgender women, like men who aren't just attracted to cis women, because why would you go to this place?
Yeah.
And that speaks to, the reminder that no matter how oppressive a culture is when it comes to sexuality and gender, that is always a construct that queer people exist everywhere and have since man evolved into what he is.
Yeah,
like, it's
and
just the way it is.
The interesting thing is, Hader comes into this job not knowing what's going on. It's Qazeer, his friend, refers him to the job.
Well, he thinks he's gonna be like selling tickets at the box office or something.
Selling tickets until he realizes he's dancing, and it's for an erotic club, and he doesn't want to do it until he sees Biba like for the first time, and you could tell he's like instantly enamored.
He sees Biba before that.
Yeah.
At the hospital when his sister-in-law is giving birth.
Yes.
And the first time he sees Biba, she's covered in blood, the front of her. And when he sees her again at the theater, he makes that comment of, oh, I saw you before at the hospital. And she goes, that wasn't me. And so sort of whatever it was, she doesn't want to talk about. We were talking about the technical aspects, and I wanted to get back to that just for a minute. I felt the nighttime lighting in the movie is done
so good. It's so
these
good.
Oranges and yellows contrasted with the blacks. And so often everything is kind of silhouetted in black except for like faces a lot of the time. And it made you feel that kind of like, there's talk going on here about there not being air conditioning. It's a, very tropical part of the world. And so that choice of lighting, I feel like added to the humidity.
There's like
in a way
warmth to it.
Yeah.
And there's like blues going into purples, the yellows going into orange, and they such beautifully done way that it doesn't feel artificial, even though like
it's stylistic,
like
clearly.
It's stylistic, but they make it seem so natural.
Well, and there's this contrast in the technical aspects of the movie between Hyder at home and then Hyder when he's with Biba, because he sees Biba at night. So those scenes are always filmed in a different way than the things at home are filmed.
Yeah.
And I think that's very intentional that these two parts of the movie have different feels. I also think the aspect ratio of the film, the way shots are framed, especially in the home, there's a lot of constraint. Characters are kind of trapped. Yeah. There's constantly doorway thresholds, the courtyard and the walls around it. There's this constant feel that like you can't go anywhere. You're stuck here.
It feels claustrophobic, and then it adds to it because there's 4 little girls plus a baby, like, and a group of adults, and so like you feel that Hader and especially his wife have no personal space of their own because they're forced to take in one of the little girls who keeps kicking one of their sisters when they sleep. And it's just like they have no privacy amongst themselves.
Well, and then there's the ongoing plot thread of there are no sons in the newest generation of their family. The older brother, it's all daughter after daughter after daughter. The baby they gave birth to at the beginning, they were so sure it was a son. The doctor on the ultrasound had said it was a boy, and it wasn't. And it's another girl. And so now Hader is feeling pressure to have a baby with his wife, and they start to unpack some of the things between them that prohibit that from happening, which ultimately is that Hader is gay.
Yeah.
And he is not attracted to women, or cis women at least. And he ends up being attracted to Biba for the masculine aspects of Biba, we kind of learn by the end of the movie, because Biba does not want to be a pre-op trans person. Biba wants to get surgery. That's why she's working. That's why she's trying to make this money, because she wants to have bottom surgery and fully be as close to a cis woman as you can be as a trans woman,
that's
right?
Completely her decision.
Yeah, and so it's a great movie in that we have these three characters in conflict: Hader, his wife Mumtaz, and then Biba. They're in conflict with each other. It's a love triangle, yet none of them is ever framed as the bad guy in the story. Every one of them is reasonable in what they want in their life. They're just in a culture, in a situation that is making that nearly impossible for some of them to get.
And the one thing I want to say about Biba is it was such a refreshing aspect of seeing a trans person who ultimately the camera lens doesn't put her as a victim.
Yeah.
She doesn't try to go into being a delicate flower to let Hader rescue her. There are a lot of times she rescues herself. Like, she's very firm as to what she wants. She's not fucking around. And like,
which is something that probably she had to become as a result of her life experience.
Like, she shouldn't have had, but it's also like, and they're like there's a scene that like the rest of the dancers know that Hader has a relationship with Biba, so they start asking very personal questions. It gets to the point of bullying,
and they get like violent.
They get violent until Biba shows up, and her presence commands respect.
She is the strongest figure in that group.
Yes, and it is this interesting thing that within the walls of the theater, even though she's in competition with another performer, between the people that she works with, she's queen. Like, people are not allowed to call her by her first name. They are supposed to call her madam. And it is like this thing that's like, it's impacting, especially when there are times that we do see that Biba is being like targeted, like when she's out in public, where she can't command that respect. But it's kind of nice to see, even though like we do see it in American like media, but not in the way that like Biba commands it, not with that confidence that the actress exudes when she's out there.
Well, I think it has to do historically with, I got the sense that these types of theaters are almost a staple in this culture, probably something that, bleeds out of just Pakistani culture and into India. It's just kind of that, if you go back in their culture, they've always kind of recognized third or other sexes among the people. When you come to the Western culture, particularly like the sort of American Eurocentric kind of thing, Christianity has never allowed that to be accepted at any point, really. Maybe in like very small local circumstances, but in large global scales, it hasn't. And so drag performers and trans performers, the venues in Western society are often seedier, more underground. I mean, the place in this movie has a giant banner out front advertising like the trans performers.
Drag queen is more related to like a punk movement versus like an art movement. Now that's becoming more of an art movement.
But historically.
Yeah, but I think it's also just this thing that, unfortunately, from what we've seen so far in American media, when a trans character is brought up, it's supposed to be like, she's smoking a cigarette, he lifts her chin, and like there's a bruise across
there's
her
a
face,
vulnerability
and it's
that has to be there.
like, no, darling, don't go after them. And Biba's kind of like, no, fuck you.
Well, and if you think about like Western narrative structures, yeah, that makes sense. Women are objects that are meant to be saved by men. So Western culture trying to assimilate trans women into these narratives are just giving them cis women roles by going, oh yeah, they'll just be a woman for the guy to save.
Yeah.
And here, that's not what Biba is. The last two scenes that she appears in the movie, she leaves the story without compromising who she is in any way.
No.
And like the last time we see her, she's doing something very honorable, something that she wouldn't be expected to do, something that puts her in a place of scrutiny that's probably not comfortable for her, but she doesn't care because she's doing something because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and like it's this interesting thing that like, yeah, if there is a love triangle, but I think it's almost
It's a love triangle where not all three of the people ever meet each other, really.
Yeah, I mean like so Hader's wife,
Mumtaz
feels more like his best friend than his wife most of the time. And that
I think she knows that too.
And she's okay with that. She is,
because we find out that one of her big non-negotiables before they got married was she wants to have a job.
Yes.
She wants to be independent. And when the movie starts, she's the one working. Hader is a stay-at-home husband.
Yeah. Which like that's the interesting thing. And I think that's probably one of the other reasons why it kind of like they kind of did a side eye, which probably does happen. Like she works as a makeup artist and it is a feminine job at the end of the day, but she is out there making money.
And it gives her an independence and a life that her sister-in-law does not have.
Yes. And so there is that moment where, okay, Hader got a job and now the sister-in-law is complaining, well, if you don't like the food, it's going to get worse because it's just me and the girls. Like she's edging for like
Mumtaz to work at home, work from home now. Yeah.
And Mumtaz is there. The shot is so well done that you feel her isolation. It's the camera is above her head. You see like her curly hair. Everyone else is talking. You do not hear her voice. She is pulling away from everyone else because the father of the family, which is Hader's dad, makes the decision and like she thinks, oh, Hader's gonna say I can keep working because that's the. I mean, we don't know that at that time that they have.
That's something that's revealed later in a flashback.
And he tells her just to give in, and like that is when she's kind of like emotionally pulling away from them.
Well, we were talking about the sort of way trans women are portrayed as vulnerable objects for men to save in Western media. Here, Hader is the most vulnerable, weakest person in the story. Like he is under the thumb of Salman, his father. Whatever Salman says, Hader will maybe not immediately go along with, but eventually he does without question.
Yeah.
And it is to the detriment of his life by the end of the movie. Like it's one of these movies where it does not give you a bleak ending, but it's certainly not a happy ending.
No,
there's a lot of loss.
Yeah, Biba is the only one that probably gets a happy ending at the end of the day.
Everyone else in Hader's family is just kind of left miserable at the end of the movie, having to kind of reflect on what they did and how it led to the ending. We talk about the performances in the movie. For me, I kind of felt that Rosti Farouk, who played Mumtaz, was the standout for me.
Yeah.
She has, like we were saying, she has really great scenes where she's great with her dialogue and everything, but it is for me, it's that hallmark of great acting is if we point a camera at you and we don't give you dialogue to say, but there's an emotion you need to feel or a series of emotions, can you do that? And she nails it in multiple scenes where you see her going through this sort of anger, defiance, then just kind of like breakdown acceptance that like I can keep fighting, but they're going to keep winning and there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Like the society that I live in pre-decided that a woman like me is always going to lose in opposition to the patriarch. That's just the way it is. And so I think she gives like such a great, like heartbreaking performance.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, especially with everything that's going around her that shows that even though the men in her life aren't outstanding, they are not great people that you should feel the need to follow. Because, for example, we have that scene with the father being taken care of by one of the neighbors, and you ultimately realize he is weak. He is
because he's in a wheelchair. Small. He cannot walk by himself.
He can't take care of himself. And what's worse is like He leaves this woman who, like, nobody comes home at the time that they should. Her family isn't answering the phone, and in their culture, she cannot walk at night by herself.
Well, she needs a man to accompany her
She
home,
needs a man to accompany her
and he
home.
can't do that.
He can't do that, so he encourages her to stay the night
and sleep in his part of the house,
Yes.
which is a huge taboo.
only for him to be a coward the next day and send her back when her son comes in confrontation
And not stand up for her.
and it is
And
like,
it's reflective of how Hadir handles Mumtaz.
and the thing is, like, it is a heartbreaking moment because this woman who is saying, I am invisible, I am a ghost, nobody wants me because of my age, because of my gender, and how I don't have value. At the least, let me take care of this man. I don't care what people say. It's like, it's almost as if pleading, like, just fucking marry her or something.
Yeah, I kept thinking, like, why didn't you just marry her? Like, what harm
And
would that
it's
do?
just like, and he's just like, she should go home because he doesn't want to deal with, like, what society would have to say, even though everyone is kind of like saying they will accept it over time.
But that seems very important because over the course of that night, almost every member of the family does something that would transgress the cultural norms and the religious norms, but nobody openly talks about it, and they keep judging each other. And I also think Salman's cowardice is a reflection of Hader.
Yeah.
That actor, Ali Junjo, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think he did a very good job of playing a little boy. That's how I felt Hader was. He was so naive, so frightened, it seemed like, all the time.
And like, to me, it just wasn't naive. He was just a coward a lot of times.
Well, yeah, he was scared. It was somebody who lived life assuming that people were going to get angry at him if he did anything.
And
so he just chose not to do anything.
And also, like, the revelation that he'd never left his town.
Yeah, I think that was, we'll talk about that when we get to kind of talking about the themes of the movie and how the ocean is a very important element to this movie. Alina Khan as Biba is fantastic.
She's great. Just every scene that she's in, you cannot take your eyes off of her. She's so stunningly beautiful, even though, like, she herself is like, yeah, the people who stare at me long enough know that I am, like, not fully a woman, but she doesn't care. Like, it is this.
She's grown a callus to those looks.
Yeah. And it's like, and the way her determination, I really did like the fact that, like, in an American film, they would have easily painted her as a villain, or like, she's just a career woman. She's like
girl boss,
like a girl boss kind of thing. But it's just,
she's more complex than that.
It's so complex because even though, like, maybe she's competing against someone else that, like, you'd probably be like, hey, it would be better off if you guys work together. It's this understanding that, like, she's basically explaining afterwards to Hader, like, if I make this, if I become headline, I can make enough money to I can make enough money to save money, actually get the operations that I want to get off. And then he's trying to convince her otherwise. And, like, that's when she puts her foot down, because he's like, well, I love your body the way it is. And she's like, this isn't for you.
Yeah, like, she has a goal, multiple goals in life, and he doesn't. He's afraid to go for the things that he desires, and she's not. She's like, I'm going to live the life I want to live.
But it's also like, what he wants to do is to keep her in the body that she's in,
that pleases him,
because ultimately he's not really secure in his own sexuality. So here's a step to a direction that maybe he'd feel more comfortable with. Meanwhile, she's kind of like, this is who I am, and this is who I want to be. And, like, how fucking dare you try to change it because you want something else and you're too afraid to go out for it.
And she's paralleled with Mumtaz. They're both women in his life that have made it very clear what they want, and he's not listening to them.
Yeah.
And he loses both of them by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Thematically, I liked how everyone in the household had done something wrong, but the movie doesn't judge them for that. It does ask us to think about the way they judge others
Yeah.
because, well, their souls aren't clean. It does a very good job of showing you what it's like to live in a society with very rigid gender roles that
Yeah.
it's a certain thing that coming from America and not being trans, it can be hard to look at America and see that because everything is so normalized to you. So when you go to a culture that isn't as familiar, that's heightened. And I'd be very interested to know what a Pakistani person thinks of transgender media that comes out of the States and how they perceive that.
Yeah.
Because I'd just be interested in their take. The ocean part, because there's that conversation he has with, I believe it's Biba, and he's talking about he's never gone to, was it Lahore? Or I think it was somewhere else. It was
It was called Paris something, but it was like in another
it was,
part
yeah,
of
Pakistan. Of course I'm an American, so I do not know my Pakistani.
She called it the French beach.
Yeah. It's a coastal area of Pakistan, and he has never been. He's never left the town that he was born and grew up in. And he's very curious about the ocean. And I think the film uses that as this metaphor for that people's inner lives are an ocean. It is vast, it is complex, it is scary, it is thrilling, but it's something only you can experience because it is your inner life. And that's something that he struggles to connect with Biba and Mumatez, is that these women have as complex an inner life as he does,
even more complex
because they're women.
And not just because they're women, is because they understand and know themselves and they understand the world that they're surrounded with.
Well, I think it's because they're women, because in any patriarchal culture, what happens is the people that are the most oppressed know the oppressor's culture in and out, every which way. And in addition to that, they know their own culture, which is marginalized. And the people who are part of the oppressive culture, in this case, the men, only know male culture. They don't really understand
it's also
women.
like this thing of it being like he does not understand that he's queer until he's faced with queerness.
And so he's the way the movie ends, I think, is a very good metaphor for, we don't know what's going to happen to Hadir. We just know that he understands himself on a level that he didn't at the beginning of the movie. And now there is this sort of unknown future in front of him. And maybe he turns out okay. Maybe it doesn't turn out okay. We won't know. And I love the way that the director ends the movie on that note.
Yeah.
That very open, where, yeah, it could be hopeful. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But that's sort of the way life flows, right? There aren't these clear, now I know myself moments. It's a constant process of discovery. I think it did a really good job of looking at that tension between the duty a person has to the culture that they are in versus themselves.
Yeah.
And how more often than not, the duty to oneself is pushed aside in favor of the demands of the culture, particularly for women.
Yeah, I think it was this also interesting aspect is that once Mumtaz like is basically staying and working at, like being a caregiver, she is having a blossoming relationship with her sister-in-law
and learns all kinds of things about her.
Things about each other. She understands that her sister-in-law is way more open-minded than she thought she was going to be.
Because her sister-in-law she got a degree in interior decorating. That story where they're on the rooftop hanging up the clothes, and she was like, yeah, I got a degree in interior decorating. And then I met, her husband, and he was like, why don't you just decorate our house? And not understanding like why she might have gotten a degree in interior decorating.
And it's like this, and it is this interesting thing that it's sort of like, yes, you might think to yourself, like, what a culture that's probably strangling itself. But it's like, no, there is community amongst people. It's just another thing that they are restricted upon their movements, upon their freedoms at the end of the day.
Well, I think it's a good reminder that they are as free and as restricted as America is free and as restricted. It's just in different ways. It manifests in different ways. And so I think it's good for people to watch films like this because it breaks up this cultural hegemony that we're kind of taught of basically America and the world, where it's no. It's you go to any country in the world and you're going to find a complex network of human interaction. I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life in plastic. It's fantastic. Barbie and Ken are having the time of their lives in the colorful and seemingly perfect world of Barbie Land. However, when they get a chance to go to the real world, they soon discover the joys and perils of living among humans. Barbie was written by Greta Gerwig and her husband Noah Baumbach and directed by Gerwig. Ariana, what did you think of Barbie?
All right. The more I think about this film, the less I like it.
Yeah, me too.
So I get it. I get the hype. And the thing is, like, the hype has been going on for months.
Well, I mean, and we have to think about this. It is a movie, the first feature film ever made based on Barbie. It's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. Our culture is a very capitalistic culture. Barbie is one of, like, if capitalism was a religion, then Barbie is one of the, like, icons of the religion.
Mhm.
So it was going to be a huge fucking deal. That's just obvious.
That having been said, the movie rushes through certain points because it's obvious that there were certain plot points that maybe Mattel or the producers said that they wanted. And it's as if Greta Gerwig went, yeah. I'm not really interested in them staying in the real world that long. And we're not going to explain or even do a touch of explanation as to why Barbies can end up going into the real world. We're just going to say it happens. Cool. Back in, like, immediately back into the pink, shiny, fun stuff because I like that better.
Yes.
And I have a problem with that because then you want to do a big speech where America Ferrera explains how hard it is to be a woman.
One of the most, like, everything she said was 100% right.
Yeah.
But it was delivered in the most ham-fisted way. Like, it was as if you just look to camera and give a speech. And that can work in some instances. I would say, like, Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator does a good job of that. But it rarely works. And in here, I just felt like, wow, this feels like the sloppiest way to convey these ideas.
I felt it was just such a weird speech to give to these dolls that happen to be real life, like dolls, to just be like, yeah, here's how horrible the world is because, Ken by accident brought the patriarchy to Barbie Land. And it's just.
We'll get into the themes and all that.
Yeah.
But I want to start from a technical point of view. We'll start with some positives. Probably one of the best looking Hollywood films to have come out in a long time, in that it used CG sparingly and used a lot of practical effects where they could.
Yeah.
And I want to applaud Greta Gerwig for those decisions. There was a really good video that Letterboxd put out. It was like 29 films that inspired Gerwig's Barbie, and she pulled from some great places. Jacques Demy's films, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg and The Young Girls of Roquefort, very clearly an influence and like, if you're going to make a Barbie movie, Demy is a great place to pull from for inspiration. There was even some visual nods to the works of Jacques Tati, the film Playtime. For anyone that's seen that, the scene where Jacques Tati is looking down on the little cubicles in the office, that scene is paralleled when Barbie goes to Mattel, and it's a gorgeous looking scene. There are lots of references to, and I don't know if I don't think you've seen Powell and Pressburger movies, like The Red Shoes and things like that. They're very sort of, Gerwig calls it authentic artificiality. And those Powell and Pressburger movies are like that, where it's very obvious we're on a stage and these things aren't real, but it doesn't prevent us from being invested in what's happening. There's also Wizard of Oz is clearly an influence to the movie. And then Busby Berkeley musicals. There's a lot of big musical numbers. There's the stuff with Ken.
Yeah.
Ken
has so much musical.
There is the scene where they're just in that kind of like white space with some colors. I thought that scene was gorgeous. Yeah. It was so well shot. And so I don't think anyone could argue that Gerwig lacks the technical merit to make a movie like this. She gave us a Barbie movie that visually was everything you could have hoped for. Like it was Barbie on screen. So I loved that part of it, and I like that she was exposing audiences, particularly the kids that see this, to ways of filmmaking that they might have never seen before if they're so used to this kind of Marvel CG oversaturation, that it's like, oh, you can see these beautiful matte paintings in the background and these like physical sets that seem like they couldn't be real. So those were great. We'll talk about some of the acting performances. What did you think of Margot Robbie as Barbie?
I thought she was great. This is the one performance where I felt she was not lacking in anything at all versus like other stuff that I've seen her in. I think the last time I was like, oh my God, she's a really good performer was Wolf of Wall Street. But she's not in a lot of the film, and it's just other stuff. Like I watched Babylon, I did not like it, and
it wasn't her fault.
No,
that
it
whole
wasn't
movie
her fault.
but
it's like it was a performance where I feel like it was 110%.
Well, that's the thing about Robbie is I don't feel like I've ever seen her not commit to a performance.
Yeah.
Tanya.
Oh yeah.
Harley Quinn, like all of these things, she gives her all. And I like them from varying degrees. I like her best when she's not affecting a voice, because I feel like the Tanya thing and Babylon and Harley Quinn, she's doing these voices, and I just don't think her voice work like that is very strong, in my opinion. I'd like her more naturalistic, because here, even though she's playing Barbie, she's not she doesn't do like a weird voice or anything.
No, it's just like her American voice.
Her
accent.
Range of emotion is wonderful.
Yeah.
The best scene in the film is when she's sitting on a park bench in Los Angeles and just taking in like the real world for the first time. And it's a combination of Gerwig. She changes up the visual style again there. It's very natural lighting, almost like Terrence Malick kind of, where there's a lot of glare from the sun. Things are filmed in a very kind of like, there's more of a grain, I think, to the film. And Robbie gives a very emotional performance. You can see her being overwhelmed by the beauty of the world.
Yeah.
So excellent there. We also have Ryan Gosling as Ken. He is both the comedy relief and a semi-antagonist in the film. There's no real villain in the movie, which I was glad, because in a Barbie movie, I don't know how you're going to do a villain and make them genuinely threatening.
Yeah.
So what did you think of Ryan Gosling's performance?
I thought he did great. I thought that I like the fact that it's like you can see within him a performance that typically it's what most, like a lot of times ends up being like a cis woman would play.
Yeah, it's a very, well, we would say a very feminine performance.
Yeah, and it's like, especially because it's supposed to be like his day isn't a day unless he's being looked by Barbie, and how that struggle that he goes through. It's like that. The remark is also like the first half is the strongest part of the movie. The second half, it just falls apart.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be he goes to the real world. And I like the fact that, Barbie is out loud explaining how she feels like there's a level of threat going on. She just like, there's an underlining of violence.
In the real world, the men, she's like, because he's like, they're, waving at him and he's like, this is great. They're so friendly. And she, her comment of like, I feel threatened.
Yeah, she's like, and she's like being like, it's like I'm conscious, but I'm conscious of myself. And she's like, what? So she was feeling self-conscious.
But she had never felt that before.
And versus he, like them with their roller skate outfits, she feels ridiculous. He feels empowered. And she
is objectified because like a guy smacks her on the ass. Yeah. But that doesn't happen to Ken. So the film, and it's if you're gonna make a movie about Barbie, it's gonna have to talk about gender, and it's gonna have to talk about beauty standards. There's no way you could make that a movie now and not
like, so when like before it hits to them, I mean,
before the movie becomes a very dull sermon,
before it becomes basically like a list version of a Disney film,
like a TED Talk.
Yes. I did love like the scenes where Ken is like mimicking other men.
Yeah.
Which was like you said was a very like Jackie
Tati.
Tati moment where like it's like someone is like mimicking another person. I
Where
like
it's Tati's the fool, but he kind of makes the other person look foolish through the mimicry. Yeah.
And I love also the stupidity of him being like, someone asked me for time. Like for the time. He thinks that someone was asking him to like the actual time, the whole thing, not asking what time it was.
Because in Barbie Land, there's no real. There's days, but it doesn't seem like anybody has like. Because I love the joke that he's Beach Ken, so his job is beach, and he doesn't. No one in the real world understands the context of what that means. He's like, I do beach. It's just what I do.
And then him realizing that like men were in charge versus like in Barbie world, men are there for as decoration or to be like
they're second class.
They're second class. And applauding all the Barbies for their different like things that they've done. It's
what other cast members stood out to you from the film, if any did?
Not a lot, really.
Yeah, I feel like once you get past Barbie and Ken, everyone else feels superfluous.
It is like again, it's like this weird thing that like America Ferrera and like the girl that plays her daughter, Ariana. Yeah, that feels weird.
Use your name.
Yeah.
You can't pronounce and read your own name.
Ariana Greenblatt. It's just they're nothing characters.
They're stock characters that before I saw this movie, I expected might be in this movie of, well, we have to have avatars for the audience somewhere in the movie. And they're going to be people from the real world that go to Barbie Land. And of course, that's exactly what happens.
Like, you make them interesting enough, but not enough to like invest more in them. But just being like, okay, no, we got a note from the studio that we needed this, so we're just going to add them. And like, for example, there's this whole thing that the daughter Sasha is telling her mom, Gloria, is like, I like your drawings. They're weird and dark like you, and crazy, but you never show that. And like, you think, oh, we're going to get more of her personality. Nope.
Like, yeah, they're very flat characters.
And it's
for being so crucial to that second half of the movie.
And it's like, it's also like this weird thing that Grace is like Mattel CEO played by Will Ferrell's like his secretary, and
Gloria, you mean?
Yeah, Gloria, and like there's nothing she does, nothing interesting.
Because they introduce her as a secretary, but that's in one scene, and at no other point in the movie is she really interacting with Mattel until the very end.
Yeah, and like there's no argument, it's just like when Barbie finds Sasha thinking that it's like because she has to find whatever little girl's playing with her
who's in trouble,
that's obviously making her have flat feet and cellulite and having thoughts of death. And I don't care about fucking spoiling this movie because
ultimately
it's a bland movie.
Once you get past the surface level stuff, and it's a beautiful looking movie, there really isn't much depth to it because the movie just spells everything out literally for you.
So I thought like when Barbie finds her, which is like, it's a great scene per se, because I like how Barbie's like, everybody likes me, they think I'm super pretty and nice.
And once again, that's Margot Robbie, who's doing a great job acting. Yeah. She plays someone who is feigning enthusiasm while trying to hide that she's falling apart, and it's like, she does it great.
I wanted this to be more Brady Bunch than it was.
Make fun of it.
Yes, and it did.
And like really dig and do some like, because I mean it's PG-13. I don't know why. So it's like, yeah, then be kind of mean about like what Barbie has done to girls' perceptions of themselves, but it won't.
Also, just being like, when I was thinking about like, okay, so they have Weird Barbie played by Kate McKinnon, which is just Kate McKinnon. Basically, she's playing her character from the Ghostbusters movie with like makeup on her.
I've met people who they just love Kate McKinnon. They love Kate McKinnon. And I have seen multiple episodes of SNL. I've seen her in multiple movies. And I have really open-mindedly tried to go, okay, what is it about Kate McKinnon? And I can't stand her style of acting. It is so hammy. It is so mugging for the camera. And it's a kind of thing that when I was younger, I think I thought was funnier. But even those like male SNL comedians who that was their shtick, that has not aged well for me now. No. And I don't think that's funny. It's the like lowest effort kind of comedy. It's very pandering. and there's no like wit or like cleverness to it.
Yeah. And so what was it? It's supposed to be like, oh, well, Barbie.
She's weird Barbie.
She goes to weird Barbie, and she's the Barbie that represents like all those girls that would like burn her hair, like pull the limb off,
color on her with markers. Yeah.
And I thought, but because they're not that fucking daring, they would probably talk about the weird times that girls would make their Barbies fuck.
Yeah, they never
or make them
for a movie that wants to tell you it's so self-aware, they never address when kids like experiment with ideas of sexuality using the dolls, which every kid fucking does.
I'm sorry, like we did that all the time, me and my cousins.
The way the dolls, like, it's probably one of the reasons why the dolls fucking exist, right?
They were originally sex dolls to begin with
for adults. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
it was like a German toy that the creator Ruth, who we'll talk about in a minute, I forget Ruth. I can't remember her name. I don't remember the name of the people who made toys. But she saw this when she was vacationing with her family in Germany and was like, oh, we could turn that into a toy for kids. And that's why Barbie has this sort of very objectified body.
Yeah.
Is because it's derived from a sex toy for adults.
It's also like this weird thing of like being a little girl, but being fascinated with adulthood. And in a way where it's supposed to be like, and I'm not saying the movie had to have it, but at some point, if you're going to address the fact that there's a weird Barbie,
well, because they're insisting on being self-aware to a point.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like all these different Barbies are the reason that there are this way is because they were made, but there's little girls playing with them. So there are times during like their livelihood that like one of these Barbies is going to be played with, and thus reality is set upon them, and they have to like go and investigate. That's their whole thing. It's like knowing themselves.
Because they mentioned something in like the 90s that had happened with Skipper, where she came into the real world
and didn't come back.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Skipper was supposed to be like the younger sister or something like that. And you'd think at the least like someone would have like almost make it like a war flashback of like being forced to kiss another Barbie kind of thing. But of course they're not going to go that would be way too like extreme.
And it's a continuation in popular American media of completely desexualizing a movie that inherently should have elements of sex in it.
Yeah, like it could have had that moment where like Barbie is talking to construction workers, and like the funny thing is supposed to be like, oh, I'll find some female encouragement by going to the construction workers because she thinks that it's going to be women constructing it there, and it's just a bunch of men. And Ken is like, no, I love this, and she goes, we don't have genitalia. He has no genitalia, and they are okay with it. That could have been a scene where you show a little girl just forcing them to kiss, or like undressing them, which I had done as a kid. And
everybody does.
And then being deeply disappointed about being like, why does Ken have an outline of underwear, but it's skin color? Like,
well, it's the film wants to do this sort of unpacking of feminism, and I find it very funny that someone like Ben Shapiro has dedicated so much time to shit talking this movie, literally to the point of buying Barbie toys so he could burn them. When ultimately this movie is yet another brick in the wall of dominant American capitalism, because they include Mattel as a character in the movie through Will Ferrell as the Mattel CEO. Is Mattel the villain? Oh, no. Mattel they're misunderstood, I think, is what we're supposed to get. And ultimately good.
They're misunderstood. It's like that joke of it being, it's all men there that are running it. But, don't worry. He's like, all I care about is little girls' dreams, not in a creepy way. And it's like, I get the joke, but it's also like, there's no satisfaction of afterwards, like Gloria happening to have like more of a role,
or becoming an executive
like
at
an
Mattel.
Executive
Nope.
in Mattel.
Nope.
No, there's like little scenes, for example, that like for some reason when certain ideas come into play about the toys, they become real. Like sad Barbie becomes an item that they're selling. There's another toy that, because like it's like a Ken
Well,
thing that
it's
they start,
Ken's his house when he takes over Barbie's dream house.
yeah, and they start producing it, but
So-
there's no explanation as to like,
Yeah, and I don't need like something super detailed, but it's when you're dealing in a world that's absurd like this, you do need to establish some rudimentary rules
which is,
as to how this works.
yeah, and it's especially because it's weird, because it's supposed to be that like standard Barbie is influenced by Gloria playing with her.
But there's
But
multiple
so-
standard Barbies in the
But
world.
but then what happens is stuff that's happening in Barbie world is going into the real world. You're not really like making clear as to how this world works.
Well, and it's Mattel's doing some deception here because we have, I know there's like a wheelchair Barbie, and we see a Barbie in a wheelchair, right? We see a fat Barbie. There is no fat Barbie doll. Where? Mattel, do they manufacture one?
I think they made one once,
but it's not like a staple of the toy line.
no.
So it's this weird thing of faux diversity that isn't represented in the actual toys that if I went to the store right now to buy them, I would find. And it's that problem I have with a lot of liberal media, where conservative media is very pandering to its people. Liberal media is just as pandering in a different way, and that's what this is ultimately. It's surface level diversity without any substance under it.
And I think one of my problems is that even though I get what Greta Gerwig was doing by explaining all the films that she was influenced by, it just, now having seen the movie, is going, see guys, this is a masterpiece because I watched all these movies, all these other movies that were masterpieces, and we worked so hard in the set, and it was a genuine thing, and everybody loved it, so it's going to be a masterpiece. It's going to be an Oscar, guys, and it's going to be great.
I won't be surprised if it does win an Oscar for like production design and things like that.
It's not as if it's not undeserving, but it's ultimately, it feels gross.
It's no different than most Hollywood movies when you start to look at the themes and the ideas underneath it, and that it's so shallow. It lacks any sort of real inquisitiveness. It's afraid to go to places where the audience might really start thinking about something.
Yeah.
And we need to understand you will never get that type of cinema from an American corporation. It is impossible. They are not capable of doing that. They have no desire to do that. It goes against the very essence of where their power derives from. Their power does not derive from getting people to ask serious, thoughtful questions about their lives. Their power comes from convincing people to spend their money on shit. That's what it is. And then they incorporate Rhea Perlman as a version of the woman who created Barbie in a really weird, ham-handed way that, like, I mean, I guess I kind of got what they were going for, but it's...
Yeah, Will Ferrell says a comment that
her ghost has an office
on the 7th floor, and it's just sort of like, again, it keeps adding layers to this world that doesn't make sense.
But then it's like, my problem is it wants to be so grounded, but it also wants to be absurd, and it never finds a way to balance those things. So we're hit with, like Gloria's speech about what it's like to be a woman, which is, wow, what a real grounded moment. But then silly shit. And you can have both, but I don't think they pull it off very well in this movie. And I think this is becoming a consistent thing because Noah Baumbach directed White Noise that came out on Netflix back in December. Also co-written by he and Greta Gerwig wrote it together. And that was another film that looked wonderful, but was thematically shallow and didn't really seem to want to say anything really meaningful. It kind of like would brush against ideas, but then back away from them.
And it's also kind of like, it's heartbreaking because I think about like Lady Bird, that's supposed to be a little bit more close to home, intimate, like closer to her real life.
Some autobiographical elements.
Where, for example, she has Lady Bird has a conversation with her mom and she's like, do you like me? And her mom's like, no, I love you. What's the big deal? She's like, no, I know that you love me, but do you like me? Which is a lot of things that like yeah, like women have felt towards their mothers, where they don't feel that, they feel that their mother loves them, but they don't like them as a person. This is like that their mother would not hang out with them at any point in their life, that they would probably hate their guts had they not given birth to them. Then you go to Little Women, and like how like there's like that whole scene where she's talking about how angry she is, and her mother saying, "Oh, you're like me, I'm angry all the time." There's like this confusion of like about like how Joe sees her sister and being like wasting her time, when her sister's like, "I respect your dreams, why can't you respect mine?" And her dream is to be a mother. And it's like, then you get this.
And it's, I mean, I ultimately have to say I'm not surprised, because I knew that a Barbie movie backed by Mattel wasn't ever going to be allowed to be honest about the toy and the cultural influence of the toy. But it would also have to acknowledge all those things because of the place that media is in at the moment. And so it would end up being a ideologically disappointing movie. I also think that Gerwig mentioned Pee-wee's Big Adventure being an influence, which you can see.
Oh yeah.
And I just wish they had leaned more into that. Pee-wee's Big Adventure doesn't have any big themes or messages. It's just these silly episodes this guy goes through. Just make that the Barbie movie. Barbie goes to the real world, silly situations. We all laugh, save the day. Barbie Land is saved. Just do that, because honestly, that's the movie that Mattel probably wanted to make anyway.
Yeah, I think just adding Mattel and the CEOs and the executives was kind of dumb, because at the end they're not really like this big threat of trying to get Barbie back to her
There's
world.
no meaningful critique at
There's
all.
none. And so like they could have just been like a nosy neighbor, or just like this one Mattel like agent that's like really trying his hardest, versus having a whole group of men that are there for the tee are like, oh yeah, they make toys for girls, but it's a bunch of old dudes there.
What I think, if you really think about the ending message of the film, it's disturbingly nihilistic, because order is restored in Barbie Land, and what order means is that women become dominant and men are back as second-class citizens.
Yeah, and it's like this joke about being like, oh, they'll have and the Kens will have the same amount of power that women have in the U.S. Congress today, kind of shit. And you're like, that's not funny.
But like because like once again, is this a movie for children or adults? I don't know, because anyone that is serious about unpacking gender and the gender conflict that exists in the Western world would, I assume, come to the conclusion that gender as a division is an absurdity, that men being pitted against women is an outgrowth of capitalism keeping the workers divided for arbitrary reasons. It's like there used to be redheaded people didn't have souls. That was a commonly believed thing in certain cultures. Or I mean, you can find any kind of absurd belief, right? So this ongoing idea that women are weaker than men, or that men aren't as able to be as emotional as women, these are absurdities. They aren't realities. But the movie seems to like reaffirm this shit and go like, oh, well, because in the real world men are dominant, then it's only fair that women are dominant in Barbie world. And it's the same logic that you get where people talk about, we need more female CEOs. And I'm thinking, we don't need CEOs. What are you talking about? It's sort of like when they go, oh, well, we need, more Black people in Congress, but then those people end up just going along with the dominant hegemony of the culture, and they don't change anything for the better. So it's, well, what was the point then?
But it's also like this weird thing that America Ferrera's like speeches are the things that are making the Barbies realize like that they've been like brainwashed by the Kens in some weird way, because of the play thing, which was not really well executed. It's
just they needed a thing to happen for the plot.
They needed a thing to happen for a plot, because you think with like Gloria saying whatever it is that she said to these characters, they would have like this moment of existential dread, because there's this whole thing that before Barbie leaves, all the rest of the Barbies are like, wow, you're gonna see how we fix the world. And you wouldn't think that they would probably also start asking questions as to, well, yeah, you snapped me out of this, but can you explain what's going on in the real world? Like, why is that, why didn't we solve the problems? It was just brushed away. It
It was
felt
a
as
very
if
unserious ending.
I think it was just kind of like they had these big ideas and they just went with like a butcher's knife and started going through what was not interesting, and we're just like, well, we just want to keep all the pink and fluttery nice things
because
going
it
on.
just settled on a very incoherent, and if it is supposed to make sense, like I said, very nihilistic worldview.
Yeah.
And Gerwig has recently said that, she is very interested in becoming like a director of big budget movies. And I mean, I guess if that's what she wants, okay. I think her better work has been films in which her budgets were lower. They have resonated with me far more than this does. And I mean, like, technically, yeah, she's a great technical director. She knows how to shoot a beautiful looking scene. But I don't like her and Noah Baumbach's writing at this point. I think they're not very good screenwriters. I think, especially when they're writing for these bigger movies, like White Noise was absurdly meant to be some sort of like Netflix tentpole. But I just think that they read the book. It's not that kind of a book. But it seems that they're kind of catering to the studio. Yeah, the bourgeoisie at this point. And I think that's one of the things we have to look at with a lot of Hollywood creatives, particularly those who are hungry to be part of that elite class, is ultimately they are those liberals that will align with fascism in the same way that happened in the Weimar Republic in Germany. I know it sounds like I'm making some big leap, but it's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's also disappointing.
Wealthy liberals want to retain power.
But it's also this disappointment because she came from the mumblecore indie background, struggled as like an actress, talked about like maybe not feeling like she was pretty enough to do some worked with the guy that made like Welcome to the Dollhouse.
Oh, Todd Solondz, yeah.
And then ends up making this and is like, well, I'm just gonna be a big director. And it's not as if like she tagged along a few friends that happen to be also indie artists, that she's making sure they have like the work. Because I think of Natasha Lyonne on how like one of the actresses that was like in Orange is the New Black, I forgot her name. She was like the one that got pregnant. I'm sure you don't know what her name is. Like,
she was the Italian American character, right? No.
Just if you want to look it up, I could probably point it out to you. But I've noticed that Natasha Lyonne, in anything that she produces, she brings the same set of friends as she can to make sure that they have work, because she understands what it is to be a struggling.
Well, I know
actor.
Gerwig did want to cast Saoirse Ronan as Barbie and Timothy Chalamet as Ken, I think, and that fell through.
Would not work.
Yeah,
that would not work.
I think one of the things she did get right here, the casting. The casting is for those two is perfect.
Yeah,
but I find it to be another empty piece of candy that's being thrown up on the screen.
The reason that I would not be okay with those two actors is, again, you're just picking up people who are big now.
Yeah, they don't need your help.
They don't need your help. Like, it's like this weird thing. It's just sort of like, I don't understand where she's coming from. And this is like, it's, again, I've talked about it in the past, how I just have this weird feeling about certain directors, because even though in the interviews, she's so grateful for the production people, she's so grateful about all the directors that helped her, but it feels too much like she's showing off like all her knowledge in this one film and showing all the technical stuff without sticking to one.
But see, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that.
I'm not saying you have to stick,
because at least that kept me engaged in the movie. But it's
just sort of like, it felt as if she was enamored with the Barbie land and wanted to go quickly as possible back into Barbie land.
That is true, yeah.
And it was just sort of like not interested in anything else, only for like Barbie to have a Velveteen / Pinocchio moment where she becomes a real woman. And it's just sort of like, and it's supposed to be like this moment where it's like, they're like, oh, are you really sure?
Well, because it's supposed to be a big mic drop moment.
And it's just like,
and it's like, oh, okay.
And then now the studio is like, maybe now we're gonna have to do Polly Pocket. Like, Polly Pocket with who?
Directed by Lena Dunham and starring Lily Collins.
Who was a fucking problematic director to begin with, who was like the ultimate white feminist when it comes to directors and writers out there, who has not learned from her past mistakes.
But I think, what would be really interesting to me is, this is one of the problems in comics, is when you come to a character like Black Panther, he's always given to the black writer, and there's not a lot of them. There's a Christopher Priest who has been writing comics for 40 years, maybe more. He got to the point where he just would not accept black characters anymore because he's like, you're only giving it to me because I'm the black guy. And he's a writer who's proven himself that he should not be pigeonholed in that way, because he wrote an incredible run on Deathstroke, which is a character I normally could care less about, but Priest nailed it, right? And it's the same thing that's happening in Hollywood. Barbie, directed by blonde female director.
Well,
when you're like, here would be something interesting. You know what I'd like to see? I would like to see Greta Gerwig direct a G.I. Joe movie. That actually sounds more interesting to me than having her direct Barbie, because I don't know what she would do with G.I. Joe. Before Barbie came out and I saw the names attached, I could kind of project, oh, I can kind of see where this is going to go. And it's Hollywood just making obvious decisions, but not interesting ones. But again, why do we keep thinking that they will? This is not an art industry, right? When you're at this level of studio work, this is not art. These are products for consumption.
yeah.
And so we can see that through the deluge of marketing for this movie. It's not a piece of art. It's meant to be something that was to consume your life this summer. And what I think is going to be funny is this is probably going to be the most resonant summer movie. And even then, I don't think that's saying a lot, because every movie that's come out this summer has hit the box office, been a dud, and everybody's forgotten about it. It's just been amnesiaed away. Like, anybody talking about the Flash movie? There was an Indiana Jones movie that came out at the beginning of this month, and no one's talking about it.
The only reason I will remember this movie is because it's just going to make me that fucking angry at the end of the day. Because it's just like, there's so many other interesting directors. Like, we were watching Boots Riley. I'm a Virgo, just the first episode, and so many ideas have been tacked into my brain on how like well constructed this world was done without
in 38 minutes,
without telling me everything, but warning me about what was going to happen.
And I fully understand, like, oh, I understand what this story will be, but I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, and then the production quality was amazing. It's all this stuff that like people would be like, if it was done by like a white person or the fucking guy that did like Eternal Sunshine for like, they'd be like, yay,
or
oh my god.
Like, it could be done by a black person. It would just have to be somebody who was a studio stooge. But Boots Riley is clearly not that. He is very openly communist and isn't afraid of his values. So he's never going to get a movie like Barbie.
Currently, within my knowledge, do we have a black director that's kind of known that is a stooge to the studio?
Ryan Coogler.
Who is he?
Creed, Black Panther.
I don't know.
I don't know enough about him.
I would have,
but he's seen all of the movies I've seen that he's made have felt very bland to me.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, I would not know until like maybe 5 to 10 years about his career, because I think about like the guy that did Moonlight.
I was about to say, you know who would have been interesting directing Barbie? Yeah. Barry fucking Jenkins. Give Barry fucking Jenkins
about like the skin color,
about like race is not addressed at all in this movie.
It's like they talk about feminism because Sasha, like Gloria's daughter, goes this whole fucking rant about like, oh no, when we play with Barbies, it was absolute torture.
And Sasha feels like a mockery of like Gen Z.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a serious young person. It feels like the movie making a joke out of Gen Z children and their awareness of these things.
And I don't think that's ultimately fair to Gen Z.
Yeah.
Because you want them to buy tickets for their stuff, but you're going to insult them along the way. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to prod a joke, but like, that's like, it's a little too much.
Well, and it's, to me, this is a reiteration that American culture, no matter how enlightened a lot of people like to think they are, because there were a lot of, white gay people that were really into this movie, right? That they are still just as shallow as the people that we like to frame as, the backwards people, because they are addicted to and can't see beyond capitalism. They're just incapable of doing it. And it's not really a fault of their own. It's the result of the media and the education that exists in America. Is it conditions you to see freedom as, oh, look, there's an Asian Ken on screen. What the hell does that do to help Asian people and the issues they're dealing with in their communities in America. It doesn't at all. Yeah, it's nice, I guess, but all that means is Simu Liu got a nice big fat paycheck. I mean, I guess it deserves it. But like, the movie is still this corporate product, and a corporate product is not going to actually represent your identity. They will appropriate your identity and use it to make money for themselves, which is what this movie does.
Yeah, they'll give you the aesthetics that you will use to make your own identity. Or, I mean, it's gonna be a popular fucking Halloween get up.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of Barbie and Kens in Halloween if, you know, America doesn't get scorched into ashes. But yeah, so those were our thoughts on Barbie. Do you recommend Barbie to the audience, Ariana?
You can watch it, but I just feel like I was ultimately just disappointed.
I would say pirate it so you don't give Mattel any money. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes for any relevant links to things we mentioned, and especially links to our website, popcult.blog. If you go over there, you're going to find that we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, as well as on the weekends. We review things from movies to television, comic books. We've been doing a lot of solo tabletop role-playing lately. And also make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast so you'll be updated on what's going on both on the podcast and what we're doing over there. Over at popcult.blog, we are excited about August, where we will be doing all month long a flashback to 1983. It's movies that are turning 40 years old this year, and there are some really good ones that had slipped under my radar for most of my life, and I am so glad to have gotten to see them now. We'll also be reviewing TV series as well. This month, 2 of the shows we'll be reviewing are The Bear, which I'm interested to see from all the hype that I've heard about it, as well as Boots Riley's I'm a Virgo, which if you listen to this episode, you'll know we mentioned it. Seen the first episode at the point of this recording, and it has amazed me quite a bit. On the solo tabletop front, I'll be spending some time in August playing through Morkborg, which is a Swedish death metal fantasy RPG, something that if you know me personally, that's not necessarily my style, but I have had a lot of fun with it. I'm using the Solitary Defilement solo roles, which make that a little easier. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and on the website, we would like you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We've got different reward levels. If you're a subscriber at any level, you'll get access to our patron-exclusive podcasts that we do over there. I want to thank our patrons, Morphine, who donates at the sneak preview level, Becca and Matt, who donate at the $10 writer's room level. And if you donate at their level or higher, you get to pick a movie once a month for me to watch and review. You can include your thoughts as well. Well, until next time, keep listening.